This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your friend with a pussy magnet.
Oh, hey! Welcome, 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 my lovely lumps. Or should I say lovely labs? I don't know, they're both good. I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge to yarn about all things sexuality, womanhood, holistic health, and everything in between. Your legs. Oh, cringe. I couldn't help myself. Anyway, I am your host, Freya Graff, and I am a holistic sex coach and educator and yoni mapping therapist. So basically, I make my living massaging vaginas and teaching people about sex. Yeah, pretty cool. So as you can imagine, we are going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up, you're about to receive the sex ed that you'd never had and have a bloody good laugh while you're at it. Before we get stuck in though, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this podcast, the Menang people. It's an absolute privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content on Noongar country, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if y'all are ready, let's flap and do this. Oh, is there such thing as having too many vagina jokes in the one intro? Whatever. I'm leaving it in. It's my podcast.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up a couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hello, all you lovely labial ledge bags. Have I got a juicy one for you today because I'm chatting with the exquisite and accomplished Mangala Holland. Now, I've been following Mangala's work for years now, and she just knows her shit. She's no nonsense, no frills, says it how it is, and I love that. So I'm really thrilled to have you in the Labia Lounge today, Mangala. Welcome. Pull up a cushion.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here. Yeah.
Let me give you all the lowdown on Mangala before we launch in. She is a women's empowerment and sexuality coach and facilitator of global group programs. She's on a mission to help women and pussy owners become empowered through loving themselves fiercely, celebrating their sexuality, and overcoming the fear, guilt, and shame that keeps them playing small. Having over a decade's experience in the industry, her superpower is helping female-bodied folks become deeply connected to their body, pleasure, and orgasmic confidence, which is the natural birthright of everyone. Hear, hear. She's currently training the next generation of embodied female pleasure facilitators and places a strong emphasis on self-love, embodiment, and empowerment in her work, teaching in a no-bullshit, fluff-free, grounded, dogma-free style. Fuck yes. So I've been really excited to get you into the lounge because as I was saying before, I love your fluff-free approach. It's so grounded. I find it so relatable, and I think it's really sorely needed, you know, in the realms of sacred sexuality and women's empowerment work especially. Like, you know, and then when you get into the sort of more neo-tantric side of things, like, fuck this, we need this straight talk and straight shooting, you know, people to call this stuff out. I feel like it's not being spoken out about enough. So I'm really excited to just have some really frank chats and, as you put it, set about busting the myths and bullshit in neo-tantra.
Let's get into it.
Yes. Cool. And I just want to also say, like, so courageous and so, yeah, I really appreciate you being open and brave, and I think it's such a courageous thing to be talking about these things openly because I know there can be a lot of backlash, especially when you're working in the industry. It's like, oh,
yeah.
So good on you. So I want to get into chats about a few little specific things, maybe, you know, beliefs and things that are being perpetuated in the Neo-Tantra community, starting with why clitoral orgasms are so demonized. But first, I'd just love to hear a bit about your journey, you know, fill in the listeners in case they're not up to speed, and you know, like why you've now completely moved away from all of, you know, your original training and involvement in that Tantra scene.
Oh, yeah. Well, to cut a very long story short, before I got into this world, I was living in the UK where I grew up, and I was working in corporate. I was working for stockbrokers, and I was traveling all over the country for work. And I was also a complete party animal, and I was DJing in bars and nightclubs about 4 nights a week on top of my corporate lifestyle. It was pretty much a full-on raver, really, and eventually I burnt out because I did this for so many years, you know, and your system can only hold so much. So I physically burnt out, and when I burnt out, I started asking myself all the bigger questions, like, well, surely there's got to be more to life than just earning good money and blowing it all at the weekend. And started kind of, sitting with the discomfort of that and thinking, well, surely, you know, what else is there? And so that led me to basically take a year off and go travel. And that was in 2009. And I only came back to the UK in 2020. I ended up on this massive journey and started with yoga and meditation, but very quickly realized that at the core of my disconnect from myself was a massive lack of self-esteem and self-love, and I was full of like self-hatred and hated my body, and I was really disconnected from my pleasure. And that kind of as I was exploring all this, the doors to kind of the Tantra world opened, and I ended up in a school that I was told was traditional Tantra, but it was actually a bastardized version of Neo-Tantra. So it made it out like it was really spiritual, but actually it was a sex cult, to call it what it is. And so I was stuck in that environment for 5 years. I went as deep in as we fully could. And while I learned a lot about sexuality and pleasure and orgasms, there was a lot of really horrible coercion of women, particularly. It was very homophobic. It was so dogmatic. There was a lot of twisted mind control and some really fucked up teachings on polarity, on how men should behave, how women should behave and dress and act and all the rest of it. And so when I finally left there, I had to do a lot of unraveling of like, well, what does my body want? You know, I'm in my 40s. Like, the teachings were more aimed at men in their 20s anyway, with these really extreme forms of yoga and other stuff. And it's like, well, what's my truth? And as I started to kind of heal and peel back the layers from that, embodiment was my gateway into really getting into what was true for me and unraveling a lot of that dogma. And so that's kind of the personal journey. And I've been teaching for 9 years, doing one-to-one client work, and also running group programs in person and online. And it's interesting because I've seen so much of a shift over the years as I peel back these layers and was like, oh no, that's dogma. I don't want to pass that forward. That's not safe. And I just, because of my experiences in that environment, I became really passionate about giving people the tools to discover this for themselves in a way that is safe, that's not pushing them over any edges, and where there's no icky power dynamics with being encouraged to sleep with teachers, or there being this white male guru who's at the top of everything. And as I was unraveling all these layers myself, it was like I started looking at like uncomfortable questions around cultural appropriation, and all these things were intermingled in that community and in the teachings, and it was a big pile of yuck, basically. And it really gave me the fuel to step aside from a lot of what's out there and to really just stand in my truth and claim my own little corner of the internet and stand in what I believe. Yeah, and after and for a long time, as I know, you have a bodywork background as well, don't you? And yeah, and so for many years I was doing internal massage, and that is just such a powerful education into women's bodies and nervous systems and internal workings of pleasure and healing. And it was incredible to see the shifts in that space. But I also wanted to create programs for people where they can do that work at home in their own environment, and rather than coming to be fixed. So yeah, that's the short version.
Amazing. Yeah, wow. So much of what you just shared I can relate to, or I have heard from other practitioners or friends who have kind of gone into the scene, especially, friends or ex-lovers who have gone really deep into the scene and gone and lived in the ashrams overseas and like really just lived and breathed it. And I have sort of been on the sidelines going, oh my God, I don't know about
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I feel like during my time in that scene, I met several practitioners or teachers who definitely had their hearts in the right place, and at least I felt did a really great job of facilitating the trainings that I did, and so I found a lot of value there, and it was for me personally a really great entry point into sacred sexuality work at the time. But I also did come across a lot of that seedy and questionable kind of behavior and characters as well. And I mean, I did an episode that was sort of touching on this with Bonnie Bliss, actually. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, gang, go back and listen to, it's called The Underbelly of the Spiritual Community and Reclaiming Your Power.
Yeah, sort of Bonnie's amazing as well. And we've been through so many similar circles and had some similar experiences this realm, so for sure.
Totally. And it's I'm hearing from her, I'm hearing from other people, like they've sort of started out in that world and then come back around to this place of being like, oh, actually and just sort of bit by bit releasing all of the, I know that nowadays your body of work doesn't involve any of those sort of teachings that you were
there's nothing there's actually nothing I teach now that is from those days, which feels really good to me, and I know that I had to, at the time I did need something quite strong to work through what I was working through, but it wasn't it was definitely not trauma informed. And I wouldn't want anyone else to go through what I went through, for sure.
Oh, totally. Something you said in a post a while back about just like for years cleaning up the mess of, that scene. I get that as well. Like people coming to me for yoni mapping or holistic sex education sessions and things like that. And they've just had these horrific experiences where, it's been really disempowering. The sort of, there's been a real abuse of, I guess, that the power, the authority role of facilitators or teachers or gurus or whatever. So, totally feel that. And I guess something that I didn't really see at the time when I was really involved in that scene that then became increasingly obvious over the years was that whole scene, at least, the scene that I was involved in, which was more of that neo-tantra bastardized version that you're talking about that I have access to in Melbourne, Australia. It was just so drenched in dogma and should and shouldn'ts and like this is bad and don't do that and you've got to, and so the post or the thing that prompted me to reach out and ask you to come onto the potty was actually this post you did about this dogma and the shoulding in neo-tantra around clitoral orgasms. So, I mean, if that could be just a good starting point to give people an example of some of the beliefs that are being peddled out and pushed on people. Can you just talk us through your feelings on this, and maybe for those that, haven't been involved as we have in that world, explain what the general messaging about clit-gasms is in Tantra?
Yeah. So as you know, I did a post recently about that, busting some myths on this, and I was expecting a lot of pushback actually, and I didn't get any. I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? And a lot of the people who were like, yeah, thank you for saying this, were people who've been in that same environment with me. So I really touched on something, and there was also quite a few people who were, oh wow, I've not even heard of this. This is a thing. So yeah, what we were taught was that there is a hierarchy of orgasms, and the cervical orgasm is the holy grail, and the clitoral orgasms were actually kind of demonized, and we were taught that they were bad. You shouldn't. You're basically, because the idea was that you're losing energy, you're discharging energy when you have a clitoral orgasm, and on an energetic point, you're born with so much energy in your life, and if you have clitoral orgasms, they're going to deplete you quicker, so that you become sick and die earlier. Basically, is the short. Yeah, so they were really kind of seen as like the devil, and there was a lot of shaming around it. So it wasn't discussed. It was just don't do it. And I'm sure most of listeners here have, well, you know, if you've experienced orgasm, and I want to acknowledge that not everybody has yet. So I just want to, you know, put that out there. But if you have experienced orgasm, then you probably had a clitoral orgasm, and hopefully it was quite enjoyable. And, you know, our bodies are capable of this for a reason. The clitoris has no other function than to provide pleasure, and it has 8,000 nerve endings. And so to experience something like that, and to then feel shame around it, it feels really not good to me. And if you've experienced clitoral orgasms, or if you've been down the path of wanting to explore the other orgasms, and you've been taught that, well, to get there, you've got to stop having clitoral orgasms, you'll know that that's very difficult, because there's a lot of feel-good hormones involved in there, and there's dopamine and everything else. So they're actually quite addictive. And if you're trying to you know, hold back and just focus internally, that can be very challenging. And which is fine if that's what you want to explore. But then if then you're beating yourself up and being shamed because you got to a point where it's like, no, I just want the release, then to encode shame and guilt in that experience and tell yourself you're a bad person for doing that, is really not healthy. And that's the paradigm that was set up. And I will say it was the same for men as well. People with cocks, they were taught that if you ejaculate, then this is how you lose energy here. And so there is a whole, you know, it's a whole school of thought. And, you know, I do also believe that G-spot and cervical orgasms and the deep internal orgasms are amazing, and you know, there is a lot of focus in my body of work on that, but that's because it can feel more fulfilling, and it's also about getting to know yourself at that really deep level, rather than just staying with something that can be external and superficial. So I don't believe in this hierarchy. I believe that any orgasm, as long as it's pleasurable, is beneficial. And I really encourage people to get to really know themselves well, so that you can track, does this feel depleting, or do I feel energized? How do I feel after this experience? Am I even involved in it? Because, you know, the danger sometimes is that if somebody's been using, say, vibrators or something, and I've had people say to me, you know, I've got this really strong vibrator, and I've got really used to the highest setting, and I have this really physical quick release, and it comes on really fast, and it's like, was I even involved in that? And in that case, you know, that they're telling me that doesn't feel nourishing, and I want something more satisfying. That's different to shaming someone for just having the pleasure that is inherently built into your own body. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, totally agree. And it's something that's been present for me because, you know, I have a bit of a tantric background or training background as well. And I've definitely been guilty of seeing clit-gasms as inferior. And, you know, even I think the first time I ever heard of anything like this, I did I think I did Kim Anami's online course years and years and years ago. And, you know, she's not demonizing them as much as like the Tantra beliefs do. She's sort of like, yeah, they're still great and you can kind of have them as like a quick little cup of coffee, but she does sort of put them, you know, she says, oh, it's like a junk food orgasm compared to a gourmet one, which is like slightly better than putting them in a hierarchy, but it is still, you know, at the time I remember it caused me to feel like, you know, it wasn't good enough and I was a bit of a failure if I could only have a clit-gasm, or if I had one, I was like, oh, bummer, like I've just like ripped myself off. You know, and, like nowadays I think about it and I talk about it from the perspective of like, yes, they are the most easily accessible and quick orgasms. And yes, it is to be aware that like some, you know, you can have one by bypassing the arousal cascade that happens in your body that's necessary for those internal orgasms like G-spot or cervical, and, you know, that require that engorgement of erectile tissue, et cetera, you know, sex nerd stuff. It's also, you know, it's also just so good for kickstarting pleasure and arousal and like warming you up and getting the sexual energy moving.
Definitely.
And like they're not
absolutely
bad. So it's a tool, you know, and I never sort of put any of this on clients either. I'm very much like listening to what they're saying. If it sounds like they're saying, oh, it's kind of a bit depleting, or I feel a bit sort of, I don't know, I slump afterwards and it doesn't feel very nourishing, very fulfilling. Then it's like, okay, cool. Well, did you know that, you know, say a cervical orgasm can feel incredibly nourishing, and, you know, it doesn't mean that clit-gasms are not as good or you shouldn't have them. It's just, and it is going to be more time spent and more sort of, I don't know, I don't want to say work, but, you know, it can be more work to have those sort of more internal orgasms, takes more time. But, you know, if someone's having clit-gasms and they're enjoying them and they're happy with that and they're satisfied, fuck yeah, great. Nothing.
Great.
You know? Like,
exactly. Yeah.
Like we don't all need to be, like I'm all into the personal development and like trying to just sort of level up things or whatever, and I'm curious and I'm like, okay, so yeah, cool, I can have a clit-gasm, but what happens if I do this and put in the time to then have other experience? But, you know, like women already might have enough trouble having any kind of fucking orgasm, you know, which is actually really common, like you were saying. And, you know, the odds are stacked against us having a fucking orgasm or great sex already for a number of reasons. Like, you know, you really want to then shame them for having the pleasure that they can access. So, yeah, like how do you teach or talk about orgasm nowadays with clients? And I mean, you did touch upon it, but I'd love to just go a bit deeper into how you teach about orgasm in general.
So it's really meeting someone where they're at. So like very similar to what you were saying there, like I believe there is a time and a place for all of it, you know. So, and a lot of the restrictions that, you know, I speak to a lot of people who do want to experience these deeper, more profound states with themselves. It's like that sense of, somebody said to me, you know, I just want to know myself that deeply. You know, I want to really know myself at the core of my being. And that's where the cervical experiences come in, really. And there is a time and a place for everything. And a lot of what stops people is lack of time, just the practicalities. And just, you know, the crazy modern world that we live in and all the constraints we have around ourselves. And so like if you've got a leisurely Saturday morning to yourself, then great. You know, you can spend an hour or a bit longer like exploring and just being able to get that relaxed enough to be able to see what's there and to see if you can, you know, play with you know, as you were saying about, you know, having that time to build that arousal and the engorgement and to explore the G-spot and the cervix. But if it's midweek and you're tired and you just want to switch your brain off and get a decent night's sleep, then maybe the clitoral orgasm is just what you need in that moment, you know? And so it's really, you know, meeting people where they're at and meeting their nervous systems where they're at. And, you know, if somebody's got certain traumas as well, then internal isn't always appropriate. And the clitoris can be the gateway to everything else. It is important in arousal, as you mentioned. So yeah, that's how I talk to clients about it these days. And also, you know, the reason I did that post was because I get asked in every single program that I run about clitoral orgasms, and you know, what is depleting, what is preserving energy, and I've heard this, and what about that, and I thought, you know what, and that was the first time I've ever talked about it publicly in all these years. Yeah, and I was in that environment and started receiving that teaching in 2009, and it's only now that I felt comfortable enough to come out and talk about it, because I didn't see anybody else having this conversation apart from my colleagues in more of the sex therapy realm, who, you know, have done a really good job of demystifying a lot of the neo-tantra stuff, and you know, pulling it apart from the spiritualized lens and just looking at what's going on here, you know, and what helps you get off. So yeah, that's the way so I find myself somewhere in between those two paradigms, because, you know, sex therapy and sexology is great, and at the same time, people that I know in that field have told me that these a lot focused on pathology as well, as like what's not working, and let's get you to functional. And most of the people I work with are like, functional isn't hitting it for me. You know, it's like, it's not emotionally thing. And I feel like there should be something more, and I don't know what that is or how to go about it. Yeah. And so that's where I find myself. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I hear that a lot. Like, I feel like there's something missing, or I feel like there's just something more. There's just something that I can't quite put my finger on, that I'm, you know, that I'm not accessing, or that I'm missing. And so it's cool when people are curious and they come to that realization that they want to explore this and discover more about themselves on their own because of that. But it does really suck when they rock up and they're like, oh, I can only have a clitoral orgasm, and I know it's explosive rather than implosive, and, you know, this I'm like, oh, boo, like, it's okay, you know, who cares? Yeah. Just let it happen sometimes. It can be a really useful tool, and a gateway is the perfect way to describe it, you know, like, it's it's a valuable way to generate sexual energy and pleasure and arousal. And exactly like you're saying, like, for some, that is exactly where they need to be focusing. If there is trauma, if the internal is going to be too much or too triggering, or, you know, they're not able to hold space for themselves or don't have a practitioner to facilitate that, then, like, go with what you've got. The thing is that I find really funny. Oh, it's not funny, but it's just what I talk to clients. I'm like, okay, so here's the thing, like, don't feel bad that you haven't had, you know, some massive cervical orgasm or a G-spot orgasm squirted across the other side of the room. And, you know, like, think about this, like, a clitoral orgasm, it's externally accessible, it's easy to find, it's usually the first thing that you've discovered as a child that feels good when you're touching yourself. It's like the most quick, easy, accessible way to feel pleasure, and you have created these neural pathways to that area that's like, okay, I know that this is the pleasure highway, let's hop on that. And it's this gateway that, like, you know, once you have one, the risk is that then you probably don't really feel like going in the gate. You're like, oh, sweet, like, I've had that feeling. So
I'm
that's
done.
the only, that's the only thing. I'm like, here we go. If you do want to experience all of those internal, you know, orgasmic experiences, then, you know, there's a little bit of self-control that's going to be required, because what can happen is you have a clit-gasm and then you're like, oh, actually, that's enough for me, you know, like, and you just don't get any further than that. So, like, don't blame yourself. Everyone fucking does it.
Yeah, and I would say on that as well, like, the way I talk to my clients about this is like, it's like noise levels, you know, like, because clitoral orgasms are, you know, there's a very specific contraction that your body does, and it's quite a pronounced feeling, you know, so you can really feel what's going on. So it's like, it's loud. But
Exactly.
for a lot of people, not for everybody, there's some people that I've worked with that, it felt very quiet and they really wanted to amplify that. But also when we focus internally, especially in the beginning, that can feel very quiet and very subtle. And it's like learning to dance with all of them and moving between them all so that so the volume gets turned up on everything is the way I kind of describe it. And I've had some profound experiences where I've had a clitoral orgasm first and then stayed and like, what's behind that? What's after that? Taking internal then and just resting in a more subtle meditative almost space and like, ooh, there's lots of nuance here. Like let's cruise in this and see what happens. And without feeling like I've got to chase any peak experience because I've already had the clitoral experience. So that's kind of been ticked off. Okay, what's behind this, Yeah,
me too, because it's gotten everything happening. It's gotten the engorgement, your mind is like pretty ready to then experience even more pleasure internally. But it is, usually, oh my God, I don't have the time or I can't be bothered or I've kind of gotten the orgasm now. So, but if you do kind of hang around in that space a little bit longer with no goal or expectations, it is really surprising what can then happen. And I love that you mentioned the noise level is such a good way of. That's such a. I'm gonna use that if you don't mind.
No worries.
Because I find myself saying like it's don't be disheartened and don't try not to let it put you off or mean that you give up too soon if you do go internally with your fingers or a wand or whatever and you don't feel much, because that's really normal too. Like to begin with, especially, it might not feel like much. And the thing I hear the most is like, I kind of go in and then I'm like, am I doing it right? I don't really know what it's meant to feel like. Nothing's happening. Am I, what? And then they're kind of like, it was just a bit meh. So I gave up. And it's like, cool. Well, that makes sense. I probably would too. But here's this me sitting here telling you like, if you just sort of practice and don't give up, you can train your body to start honing in on some of the nuance and the subtlety and building it. But it's a lot quieter compared to that like in your face clitoral pleasure. Bam, bam.
Yeah, absolutely. Anna, you touched on something very important. You said like exploring with no goal. And this is the thing, like this is what needs pulling apart more than what part you're exploring, I think, is the touch and exploration without a goal, because that's normally where the magic lies. And the thing is, if we take that practice of, which is something that most of us have done all our lives, of, well, I touch this bit and I rub that bit and then I get this outcome. That doesn't work quite the same inside. And so that's what needs pulling apart, I think it's, and, feeling meh is also a sensation. Feeling numb is a sensation. And it's more just about getting to know what's there today and not judging it and just being curious and exploring there. And that's what, in my experience, opens up so much for people.
Yeah, totally. There's nothing more elusive than an orgasm that you are trying to make happen.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the internal ones I find will just kind of come out of nowhere and catch you by surprise when you're not trying too hard and putting too much pressure on yourself. So yeah, I love that you mentioned that. So
and also as you go on. I was just going to touch on squirting as soon as you mentioned that, because people see that as like this big achievement. But in my experience, a lot of people don't even find it pleasurable if they do squirt. And it's not necessarily orgasmic. So I think it's important that myth is busted, because that's also very much tied up in that whole Tantra scene as well. And I don't think it's particularly helpful. Some people love it, but some people don't.
Yeah, it just really became trendy overnight, didn't it? It got put on this pedestal and it's very like, super sexy and porny and like, I don't know, it's just, I think it's just glorified a little bit more than it needs to be. And then, of course, people are going to feel inferior if they don't squirt. Which is not helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Before I'm going to get into a bit more around sort of broaden out to some other myths that need some busting. But before that, I want to say get pregnant and die.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die. Don't have sex in the missionary position. Don't have sex standing up. Just don't do it. Promise?
So I'm just wondering if you've got a story or an anecdote of how your sex education failed you.
Oh, yeah. Oh my goodness. Like my parents did try and talk to me about, they did talk to me about the birds and the bees as a kid. And I feel that was, they did an adequate job of that, considering it was the 80s, and I remember at the time feeling like, I'm really glad that they talked to me about that. But where it really failed me was the shaming. Yes, they taught me about the birds and the bees, but at the same time, the message I was received is, if you get yourself into trouble, you're kicked out instantly. We will disown you. And so that put a lot of fear into me, and it definitely didn't stop me having sex. I lost my virginity at the age of 13. And, way too young, but I was very much in this rebellious frame of mind, and I'm doing things my way. Which never really went away. But just seeing other friends of mine around that age who did get pregnant, and knowing that it just put the fear of God into me, basically. I was terrified of being disowned by my family and kicked out. So from a very early age, shame was very, very much built into sex for me, and it took me a long time to unravel that. And I'm sure I know I'm not the only one who's had experiences like that. But my dad, even though he was quite open-minded about all kinds of religion and everything else, he'd been brought up as a Catholic, and there were some things that just didn't get unpacked, and that was one of them. And so I feel there was no place to talk about pleasure. There was no place to talk about contraception. So I went off and put myself on the pill as soon as I was legally able. And the only people I could talk to about that who were elders were my teachers at school, because I felt I needed to talk to someone about that. And I feel like, I look at my friends now who are parents, and the conversations they have with their teenagers, and I'm blown away. I'm so inspired by some of these conversations that they're able to have, because they've been doing the work themselves. And I recognize it's no fault of my parents. It's just they did the best they could with the tools they had.
Totally.
But it definitely left some imprints, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I think a lot of people are in that boat, but I also find it just so heartening to see the kinds of parenting and the kinds of conversations that are happening, at least in my circles. I'm like, oh my God, there's hope.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Cool. So back to Tantra, Neo-Tantra, maybe we can even chat about the difference between those for those that don't know. And I did want to just sort of talk about, like, do you feel like there's a lot that's lost in translation when it comes to these practices being brought over to the West and then peddled around as like the latest new age spiritual path? I mean, we can also go into your thoughts on cultural appropriation in this space, because I'm so curious to hear you speak on that. It's a fucking big topic. That could be a whole episode, but launch into it.
Yeah. Where do you want me to start?
I guess, the difference between Neo-Tantra and Tantra, and how that, that kind of moves into then Neo-Tantra.
Yeah, it does. So classical Tantra, which I actually do practice, is very much focused on deity. It's basically worshipping deities, and a lot of rituals, a lot of a lot of chanting, a lot of meditation, a lot of mantra work. And it's very precise and very technical, especially in the tradition that I'm initiated into. And it's basically about viewing the divine in the non-dual tantra. It's about viewing the divine as not separate from ourselves. So if I am meditating on a goddess, at one level, I am also the goddess as well. So if I'm anointing parts of my body with certain mantras, then I'm actually honoring the goddess and anointing her. So that's the simple explanation. And sexuality, in that there's only a handful of places where that's mentioned in the translated text that we have available. It's a tiny, tiny proportion. And there are some sexual practices tied in with this, but you wouldn't be initiated or taught those unless you were at an extremely, extremely high level of achievement. And in the Kashmiri lineages, in Shaivism, for example, you wouldn't get taught that unless you were pretty much enlightened or close to it. So it's definitely not something that would be taught to anybody outside of that, and definitely not to Westerners. And Neo-Tantra kind of burst around from Osho, basically, and from the 60s and 70s, and kind of took some of these teachings and the idea that, you know, the body is sacred, and so everything is worthy of worship, and there's no separation, which is beautiful and awesome. But then it also mixed in a lot of what we see now as more sacred sexuality. So, you know, internal massage or yoni or lingam massage, or even using words like yoni and lingam to describe our genitalia, comes from Neo-Tantra. And it's the stuff that you see, you know, breath work, energy circuits, Tantra massage weekends, all of this. And it's a distortion and a dilution of what Tantra actually is. And I'm not saying that Neo-Tantra in and of itself doesn't have some benefit. But what's dangerous is that a lot of people think it's real Tantra, or that it's classical Tantra when it's not. And they will use the word Tantra when actually they should be calling their work Neo-Tantra. And I fully hands up, you know, it took me years to understand that myself. And I had to do a public declaration at one point that I no longer call my work Tantra, because I started to understand the differences, and I started to understand the harm that was behind that, because we're all calling each other Shiva and Shakti and placing, you know, putting these ideals of God and goddess on each other, which was just feeding into some fucked up polarity teachings, and teaching women that they have to be a certain kind of feminine, and that's what a Shakti is very damaging on all kinds of levels. But it's also massively culturally appropriative as well. It's like, just take, you know, it's like we haven't dealt with the level of shame that we're holding about our own genitalia and getting comfortable with calling this a cunt or a vulva. So because we haven't dealt with that, we're just going to use the word yoni because it sounds nice. You know, it's like I've had to go through my own process with this as well. But it's like, wow, how powerful when we get to strip away that and get to do these deeper levels of understanding. So yeah, I see there's a lot of unconscious stuff playing out in these circles. There is a lot of shoulds, like we're not good enough, we're not spiritual enough, and you know, it feeds back into these orgasms are more spiritual than these, and all this kind of stuff. And most of what is being peddled isn't actually based on any specific spiritual teachings. It's more on a feel good, huffy fluffy kind of stuff. So yeah, that's my take on it anyway. You know, and don't get me wrong, I've seen people and also a lot of couples go into the neo-tantra world looking for meaning and healing and opening and having some profound experiences. But it really, if you go down that road, please, I know this word is overused these days. The phrase "do your own research," but please, ask around and get good recommendations, because there's a lot of snake oil salespeople out there. There's a lot of predatory behaviour. There's a lot of stuff that's just not very effective, and stuff that is also quite culty. So it's just choosing wisely and making sure that anything you enter into is trauma informed and has good support, because I've seen a lot of people get damaged by being swept up in environments and exercises that they weren't ready for. And you might feel finally I feel a release of energy, and then you have a crash afterwards and you can't integrate it, because actually it was just your nervous system being activated, and it wasn't the big breakthrough that you thought you were having.
Oh my God, totally. That absolutely happened to me. I'll put my hand up.
All right.
Yeah, big time. I'm still fucking working that out. And yeah, it's funny, like you mentioning like couples and things coming. I mean, I have couples contact me a lot, wanting recommendations on workshops or trainings in Tantra, because they want to explore that in the relationship or for themselves, and they're seeking something deeper and more meaningful and rewarding and satisfying and, than what they know of sex. And I do feel that compared to the mainstream blueprint for sexuality and the absolute cunt loads of bad sex that's just being had out there routinely because no one knows better.
Yeah.
The sacred sexuality route might actually provide some really helpful tools and reframes to change their approach to intimacy and lovemaking. And, I do really dig the reverence and the sacredness that it brings in, communication and the intention behind it. I learn a lot of useful stuff from my meanderings through the Neo-Tantra world, but then I just never know where to send them or what to recommend these days, because because of all of this stuff that we're talking about, it's just so rife, and I guess, I mean, you have online offerings and I'm also working on the online course sort of vibe, but like where else could people start? What's a good entry point into this work that's going to give them teachings and meaning and game-changing experiences of their bodies without all that dogma and like sleazy sex guru stuff,
Yeah, it's really hard to think of, if I think of particularly couples work, I can't even think of anybody right now that, it's really hard to find people that I would recommend. And I think if you're doing this, whoever you decide to work with, I think it's also good to have some counselling or therapy on the side so that you're dealing with the shadow shit as well and not just looking for the sweet cherry on the top, because there can also be a lot of bypassing in this world as well, where people just want to stay in the feel good. There are people that are great, and my brain is struggling to find the names of those people.
That's so okay. We can always put them in the show notes at the end if you think of any. But I was just curious because, like, I don't know who the fuck to. I'm just like, oh my God, don't ask me. I haven't really been part of that scene for a long time anyway. But I would not personally recommend, like, really anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I also, before I kind of get sidetracked, I was noticing like some, I guess, like almost discomfort or like a bit of like, I was feeling almost a bit confronted as you're talking about cultural appropriation and the word yoni, and it brought up this thing that I've actually been chatting to people about because I'm just really trying to nut it out myself, and I guess now the opportunity is presented to ask you about it, but I have asked another person who does yoni massage on the podcast. But what the like, I feel like, yoni, it's the only word that I know of that really encompasses that whole reproductive space, that's got a really beautiful kind of connotation to it. Yeah. And also the modality that I practice is registered as, like, the name of it is yoni mapping therapy. That is what I'm qualified in. That is what I do. That's what people are searching for. That's what I've got on my website. But like even Bonnie and I have talked about like, oh, don't know about this word anymore. And and I'm really curious what you think, because I know I don't know if you call it this anymore, but you also do internal and external yoni massage, and you've trained up practitioners to do this body work.
Yeah.
What do you think of like using the word in that context?
Yeah. And this is it's a big one, and I've been through a big process of this myself. So I no longer do internal work or body work, but you know, I had to pull this apart myself, and it was as I was doing some work with a mentor in the anti-racism space, and I had a big revelation around this. It's like, oh, this feels really uncomfortable and really sticky. And she's like, well, there's something there you need to look at then, you know. And I'm like, yeah, you know, if something feels uncomfortable, then I have to honor that. So yeah, and as you say, it is the only word that encompasses that whole area. And when I started unraveling this, I did talk about this online, and I had a really great conversation. And you know, it's really, and I think this is something we all have to arrive at our own place with and sit with. So some of my clients will say yoni, and one of the first questions I will ask a new client is, what do you call this part of your body? And we work with what they use. And if they're struggling to find a word that feels good for them, then that's some homework right there, whether it's, you know, giving this part of them a name. And I think it's also really beneficial to be with the anatomical, you know, like, you know, there is the vulva and then there is the vagina, and not getting those two mixed up like everybody seems to do. You know, so it is a big process. And it's something that is an ongoing inquiry. And I know there's amazing people like Uma Dinsmore-Tully, for example, who talks about, you know, reclaiming the word cunt. And, you know, this is cunt power, Yoni Shakti. You know, it's like, this is the core of it. And the word cunt, as I understand it, has Celtic roots and goes back a very long way. And that's my lineage. So you know, can I get comfortable around using that word and feeling the energy of that, and like, whoa, that feels confronting, but there's also a lot of power in that, you know. And so this whole inquiry is what led to me doing my first interview series, my summit. I called it Vagina, Pussy, Vulva, because I wanted to have these conversations with experts in pleasure and sexuality and embodiment about how do we pull this apart. And that was the fuel. It created a huge a huge opening in my body of work, but also a lot of energy around having these discussions and just guiding people to inquire for themselves. So it's a big one, it really is.
Yeah, totally. I think it's going to take me a while before I sort of come to any conclusion. And I mean, if it was up to me, I'd totally just call it cunt mapping therapy or something like that. Hilarious, great.
You'd never be able to advertise anyway, would you?
That's the thing. We're up against there's so many things at play, and there's so many other reasons other than just how I feel and what my opinion is. Why? I mean, you know, is it a good move in terms of like marketing and business, and would it sit well with, I mean, I'm happy with using the word cunt, but I've done a lot of work to get there, and I've read a lot of books, even the book called Cunt, which is all about reclaiming that.
Yes.
So, you know, but not everyone has. So then I might be totally unpalatable to those people that are still confronted, understandably, by that word. So, you know, and then there's limitations of the English language and all of the sort of anatomical phrases. A lot of them, you know, have basis in pretty derogatory words, and it's just a whole
absolutely it is. And also when you start to like pull all this apart as well, and it's like, well, why couldn't I use the word cunt? I mean, it just shows you the levels of all these power structures that interplay here and intersect. You know, so we have patriarchy, we have racism, white supremacy, we have capitalism, we have all of these, and it's like this is the work. I really believe it's like, as we're doing the pleasure work, And the embodiment is just like, this is where we get to pull it all apart and go and ask ourselves, well, who says this? Who says that? Is this my truth? Do I hold this still, or do I some of these? And it's a lifetime's work, you know. It's not easy by any means.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you for talking on that. I feel like every conversation I have, I get a little bit more clarity. And at the moment, I'm like, well, it's just kind of, it's a cop out, but it's easier to just like leave the name and keep using them. And I think because I've got really great intentions and integrity in my work, and I know that I'm okay with continuing to just use it for now. But it's really interesting having these convos, because I know that there'll be a shift that has to happen eventually, and I'll land on a game plan. But thank you for your input for now.
Yeah, and I think it's also really, you know, as people are going through this inquiry themselves, to have discussions with people from South Asian origin, you know, and engage them in the conversation, because, you know, a lot of this, there's not many people from India and South Asia that are actually involved in these circles, and so that also feels a bit weird and a bit off to me, when they're appropriating, you know, they're talking about these goddesses and using these Sanskrit words, and I say that as someone who uses Sanskrit word as my name. I'm still sat with that one. I mean, that's huge. So there's so many layers. I am not perfect human in this at all, you know, but I think responsibility for us to keep digging.
Yeah, totally. And thanks for making it so I guess accessible and approachable, because I think with some of this stuff it can be really like, holy shit, I don't even want to talk about it, because it will then turn into this confrontation, and there's a lot of like, and then
I'm going to get cancelled, and
exactly, the cancel culture and the PC police and all of it is just, it makes it almost untouchable. And for years I've kind of just been like sidestepping and avoiding and being like, oh my god, that's just like too hard basket, no thank you. And you know, you might want to ask certain people questions, but you're like, I don't want them to turn around and get offended or pissed off, or so it's just not to ask. And then the conversations aren't happening, and then you're not learning.
Exactly.
Yeah. So awesome. Go us. So just to get back into the shoulds and the myths, what are some other like common myths that you came across in Neo-Tantra, and the things that we're, you know, are getting shoulded all over people, that kind of spring to mind? Yeah, it's a big one. Yeah.
There's a couple that really spring to mind. So the first one is about pushing energy upwards. There is this very much in the Neo-Tantra of like, we've got to sublimate, we've got to move this sexual energy from the genital area and push it up to the crown, and, you know, really push, pump. And I was in that environment for a long time, and I did a lot of very strong practice in this realm. I really went full power with that and those practices, and it left me feeling very destabilized, ungrounded, on the verge of panic attacks and emotional meltdowns, and wasn't suitable for a 40-something-year-old woman. You know, it wasn't suitable for my body. And I think, you know, in this Neo-Tantra world, that there is a lot of that, a lot of heavy breath work, and a lot of strong pushing it up, which might be suitable for younger men who've got a lot of energy and need to move it. But it doesn't work so well for people who have vulvas, in my opinion, because the seat of our power is, and our center of gravity is in our pelvis. So why would we want to move it up and just move that out? Why don't we sit in that power and feel that grounding and our connection to the earth? And I feel we need a balance of, you know, my Tai Chi and Qigong teachers will talk about, you know, the connection between heaven and earth and balancing. And I think that's a much healthier paradigm to really be in our center of gravity and to honor that and to feel our power, rather than trying to push it away and push it up, and move it up. Because there's a lot of violent techniques that are used, a lot of really strong overwhelming breath work and things like that. And particularly if you want to experience orgasm, then taking that energy out of the pelvic area isn't so helpful. You know, there's a time and a place for circulating to the heart, or, you know, circulating it up and down, but like, don't just pump it up, you know, it needs to come back down as well. And that gets missed a lot that gets missed a lot. And then there was another myth that really comes up, and that is this whole polarity dogma. And I'm seeing that this has really bled into some of the personal development spaces. And there's a lot of, for want of a better phrase, there's a lot of toxic masculinity that has taken coaching, that has taken these polarity ideas and really embedded it in there, and basically teaching women or teaching men that they are the leader and the doer, and, you know, they are the very powerful one, and the female is the one who has to submit and surrender and follow the man's lead. And that can be okay in erotic role play. And it's really good that there is difference and that you can come apart and have sexual attraction, but you can't. It's not a way to live your life. And seeing some of these, there is this emerging kind of network of younger male coaches, particularly, who are teaching this stuff and doing it in a really harmful way. And I'm seeing some of my colleagues who are in the trauma world are having women come to them who've been deeply traumatized by this work. And I find that really disempowering and damaging and unhealthy. So there are people that I do recommend in the polarity world. People like Michaela Bowen. She's also amazing for couples work as well. Like her podcasts are amazing. She talks a lot about how to keep this spark alive and to create that, but also have a functioning, healthy relationship as well. And the danger is when you try and live this as a full lifestyle, because it just puts so many shoulds on both men and women that are unrealistic expectations. And you know, men shouldn't show emotions. And also, I mean, where does that leave? Where does that leave the LGBTQI community and all of this? Where does that leave trans people? Where does that leave everybody else who isn't a heterosexual couple? It's a big part of it.
So old-fashioned, isn't it? It's just so binary language.
Yeah, it's like taking the idea of the 50s housewife and just sticking a bindi on it, you know, and making it this spiritualized fucking, you know, and just
that's the one-liner of the podcast, I reckon. Oh my god, it totally is. And I'm trying to like check myself and not feel too like just ashamed, but like I totally didn't question this shit when I first started exploring Tantra.
Me too.
Like, oh wow, okay, oh my god. And like it's so fucked up actually, like a lot of the stuff. And also like it can just be taken out of context. It can be used for like different means to what it was intended. Like polarity, totally a thing. Totally really valuable. But then people are like taking it out of context, and I guess that's you know, it kind of tends to happen when these ancient practices get brought over to the West and marketed. But I love that you mentioned that. It made me, it might not be quite what you were talking about, but it reminded me of this lover of mine I had years ago. We were so in love. It was all going to be awesome. And then he went overseas and like got sucked into an ashram and like fully never came back, like sold all of his belongings, lived there. Like I think he teaches there now, so full on. And they come back and visit every now and then and come and stay with me. And I remember he said that he would sleep on my bedroom floor because that was as far away as he could get from me after we'd been intimate. And we didn't even have sex, but intimate. And then he would do like an hour of yoga and sublimating the energy and standing on his head. And then he would sleep on the floor. And he was like, well, ideally I would be 7 kilometers away from you to maintain the polarity.
Yeah, oh my God. Yeah, yeah. I'm sure I must know this person because it's exactly the same shit I was in and was taught. And the danger is when it's taught with such certainty that this is the only way and this is how it is and there's no room for nuance. And I think this is a massive red flag in anything. If there's no room for nuance and anything is taught in this is the only way and this is 100% accurate and right, run. Because, you know, that's dogma right there. But I seen that. You know, I used to have when I lived in that environment, I had intimate experience with somebody and go really deep. And then it was finished, we'd eye gaze for a little bit. And then he'd go, right, I've got to go and be all these kilometers away from you. And I'd be like, can't you just stay the night? It was horrible. It felt really disconnecting, you know, and I know there is, you know, some couples really benefit from living apart. And I think if I was in a long-term relationship, I would probably want that at this point in my life as well. But, you know, sleepovers are fun. Let's not demonize them, you know?
Totally. And especially if you've gone really deep with someone in that vulnerable space in intimacy. What about the aftercare? What about the fucking cuddles and the pillow talk?
Exactly.
You know, like, oh my God, how dysregulating to then just like separate and be like, whoa, this thing has been ripped away from me, ripped out of my vagina and sent off 7 kilometers.
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
So I'm just conscious of time because I don't want to go too far over. Do you have like a little 5-10 minutes? What's your time frame looking like?
Oh yeah, I'm totally fine. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, it's early morning here, so.
Oh yeah, of course. Beautiful. Well, I've got a couple more questions, but first I'd love to do TMI. We love it.
TMI, we love it. TMI, we love it.
So, do you have a TMI story for us that you're comfortable sharing? And also, so fine. If you don't, if you say no, that's equally as inspiring because I don't know if I mentioned relabeling too much information as too much inspiration because, you know, that's where that is just like destigmatizing, releasing shame, dismantling the stigma, having these conversations. I know you're good for it.
Yeah. So the things that springs to mind, is that I actually started a lot of my teaching work around anal sex. And when I moved to Australia, that's what I was known for. And I used to run workshops called Backdoor to God. So like really, and I ran them in Thailand as well when I lived there. And this was kind of like when I first stepped out on my own, that was the direction I went in because nobody in that sticky neo-tantra world was talking about anal pleasure. And I was like, oh, it's really important to me and hugely pleasurable and really energizing and powerful. And it needs to be taught with care. So I had a lot of pushback, and I think part of the pushback was because I used the word God in my workshop. So, you know, it's like it attracted a lot of international publicity. It was like, whoa, okay. But yeah, that's initially what I was teaching, and I haven't taught that content for a long time. Just because my work, you know, evolved into what I teach now. But so I have a big background in that, and I think that was all well and good until my parents saw something on Facebook. That's a very awkward conversation with my parents. They're now blocked from Facebook, by the way.
You've got to do it sometimes.
Yeah. And on a similar theme, then they read about me in the Daily Mail. There was an article about yoni massage a few years ago, and they'd quoted me. They'd been at the the newspaper had been on my website and taken some quotes. They'd never reached out for quotes from me, which I thought was a bit off. And so my parents read about me in a national newspaper. So that was another interesting conversation. So for many years, they told people I was a yoga teacher. And they didn't know how to frame it. So now the last time, like about a year ago, my mum asked me, so what should we tell people? Because they've got their own shame layers and the rest of it. So just tell them I'm a life coach. It's just just tell them I'm a life coach. And then I had to have a conversation. Hey, I'm going to be on TV talking about vaginal dryness and sex toys. Okay, should we watch it? No, you don't need to watch it. So several TMIs wrapped up in all that, I think. But
love that. That's so funny. I feel like
So I just it's like I hope this reassures your listeners that we all have these limits where we have to dial ourselves back in a bit. I talk about vulvas and pussies and orgasms all day long, and yet I still have places where I have my own discomfort in this as well, so that I just want to normalize that.
Oh, thank you. That's such a really important thing to point out. I've sort of talked about this on a couple of episodes with people, because I often will ask, like, so how do your parents feel about this? Have you told them that you and that's been a really interesting journey for me as well. Like, that is, I think, family, at least for me, is like the sticking point where it's just like that one part that hasn't fully been integrated, where there is still remnants of a little bit of like shame or embarrassment. And, like my mum she'll be trying to be supportive, like, oh, I'm going to listen to your podcast. And I'm like, oh, you don't have to. You don't have to.
And there's layers to that. And it depends, and I really see this is also just being compassionate and meeting people where they're at, and not, it's more compassionate for me to be kind to my parents and not be in their face about it. And at the same time, I totally stand behind my work, and I'm like, my work is about helping people to become empowered, and I'm not backing down from that. So
absolutely. I think I've finally come to a pretty good place as well with my work, where I'm in that spot exactly in the middle, where I'm like, I 100% back my work and myself and my integrity and all of this, and I'm so happy to have a conversation with whoever about it. But if I can sense that it's just a bit much for them, or they're not ready for that, or that's going to be a bit too uncomfortable for them, then I'm like, cool, I don't need to be in your face. I don't need to be arguing my point or like sort of standing up for what I do. Like, I don't really give a fuck. Like, I know why I do it, and that it's helping people. And I know that I've got my community and my audience that are into that. And if my family aren't part of that community or audience, or they don't want to be hearing about it, or they don't believe in it, that's okay. I don't need
that's okay.
That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really want to, now that I actually didn't know that about the Backdoor to God career highlight, I would love to do an episode about anal sex with you one day, if you were open to it. I know it's not really relevant to your work these days, but like, oh my God.
No, totally happens.
Fuck yeah. Oh my God. Awesome. Because also I just want to explore more. I feel like I'm a really late bloomer. Like, I had so much shit when it came to sex and my body and blah, 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 blah. And I've been doing the work for years, and I that's like the next frontier that I've explored a little bit, but not heaps. And even though I kind of know all the stuff theoretically or whatever, and I've researched and I've chatted, like, I'm still not a pro in that department, and I'd love to talk about it. I feel like I'm missing out on this whole world.
Totally happy to jam on that anytime. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Look forward to that, lovelies. I'll have an anal session coming at ya. So just to kind of wrap up what we were talking about earlier, why do you think so many like people, kind of sleazy, murky people who aren't in integrity or, who are a bit, I don't know, don't have the best intentions, why do you think they're attracted to these modalities like Neo-Tantra?
Yeah, and I think so. I think what gets sold to people, and this is what I saw with a lot of the community when I was in that world, is it's sold to them as, particularly for men, but I mean, everybody's got their own distortions and shadows. So, but I think for men, it was sold to them as a way to become the sexual hero and overcome your shyness and your, become a better lover, become a great performer in the bedroom, and have lots of women available, and so a lot of those people were initially very insecure, had a lot of shame around their sexuality, were dissatisfied with their performance, or felt that they were too small, or whatever it was. And being in that environment gave them the tools to feel like a man, and to feel, like I am to go into that polarity, and to suddenly have lots of beautiful available women. Who doesn't want that? It's like, and also there was a lot of polyamory encouraged in that as well. So it was like, so you get to have all the benefits without having to deal with the emotional shit. So you just bounce around from women to women and fuck everybody without having to clean up your own mess. And that was kind of, seeing the people further up the hierarchy. That's what was modeled to them. It was like, you take as many women as you can, and you initiate them. You as an advanced man, that's what you do, and so it perpetuates. And I think, I know that there's a very small handful of good male body workers out there, but when it comes to this work, if you want to explore internal massage and you have a vulva, I would strongly recommend that you work with someone who has the same anatomy as you, because I question why do people want to step into this work? And often it's coming from this egoic, shadowy, sticky place of lots of available pussy, basically.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there's female shadows too, and a lot of that I think is around validation, about being liked and being important and relevant, and there's so much. There's a lot of shadow and a lot of spiritual bypassing, and a lot of wanting to skim around and have all the good feelings without doing the deeper, uncomfortable inner work.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And when you were part of the communities and overseas doing trainings and things, were you kind of coerced or encouraged or like bullied into sleeping with your kind of teachers, or
yes,
how did that all go?
Yeah, well, that was normalised from day one, and that was considered what you were supposed to do if you wanted to be fully initiated into that. And it took them a good few years to wear me down. It took several years, actually. I was there from 2009, and I think it was 2014 that I finally caved in, because I felt I was blocked, and I'd had this stuff for all those years, and I felt that I was blocked, which was nonsense. But that's what I was being told. I was being told I should have 5 lovers as a Scorpio. I'm hypersexual, and I should be having all these men. And so because I wasn't, it was like, well, what's wrong with me? It's like, well, you need to come and be initiated. And that is abuse. Plain and simple, that is abuse. To be brainwashed and to be in that power dynamic for so long that's considered normal is disgusting. So so there was a lot. Oh, the holy cock. And of course, everybody's in it. So the other women are also recommending that, because that's what they were encouraged to do. And it just, it's horrible. Yeah. And so there's stuff still goes.
Yeah.
Still happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear about it still a lot. So then after that experience, how did you feel afterwards? Were you like, what the fuck? I'm not unblocked. Now I just feel extra shame because I caved in and slept with this person. Or like, how did you, was that kind of getting towards when you were just like, actually, like, I'm out of here? Or
Yeah. And it was a process. It was definitely a process. And yeah, that's when I decided to leave, because it's like, this is not consensual. This is by any means, this is not, and there were specific instances that were so far from, that were actually just, I'm just going to call it, that were rape. And then once I left that community and started talking openly about it, I got ostracized from everybody, because, they were still fully in it. But then over the years, other people started talking as well. And there was a whole outing on that, and it went worldwide, press coverage and stuff. But that teacher is still teaching, and that school is still open. So this is why I just say be really, really, really careful, with who you choose as your teachers. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, so gnarly, so gnarly. It's super culty here, where people just don't feel like they can speak up, and then as soon as you're kind of courageous enough to speak up, everyone just shuts that door on you. And it's like an abusive relationship. It's why people get stuck in these sort of domestic violence situations as well, because there's that manipulation that just makes you feel like there's no way out. You cannot speak about it.
And the other thing I want to say on that is that, a lot of people who were teaching in the Neo-Tantra world came through those schools, and they didn't go through a big deconditioning process necessarily. A lot of them didn't wake up and leave. A lot of them distance themselves when the shit hit the fan publicly. So that means they're still holding on to this dogma, and that's how it gets perpetuated, because they haven't unraveled it fully for themselves. And so I see this, and it's a lot of it is, it's a lot more dilute, but I still see some of the same ideas playing out, and it's like, I know where this has come from. And like, no, But at the same time, the other thing I want to say is, there is a lot of beauty in this work, and it's so worth diving into your sexuality and your pleasure. Don't let what I've said here put you off from wanting to explore your pleasure and your power, because, it's such a rewarding journey if you do it in the right way with the right mentors.
Totally. Yeah. Well, that segues me perfectly into chatting a bit about where you've taken your work now and the main principles that your body of work is underpinned by. Because if we're sort of saying, okay, don't go and live in an ashram and like fucking bang your guru, but here's what we could suggest. Let's chat a bit before we finish up about your work now and what offerings you've got.
So my work is it's quite gentle and nuanced. So I love to take people on the journey, and it begins with creating safety in the body, because you can't, without that foundation, there's no point. You can have all the best tips and tricks and techniques in the world, but if you don't feel safe in your body and be able to stay in the body, you can't. It's not gonna stick. So that's the foundational pieces, and this is where also the embodiment work comes in. So it's like creating the best conditions for you to really get to know yourself from the inside out, in the whole of your body, not just your genitalia. And then from there, focusing on cultivating full body pleasure, and then from there exploring orgasms and the deeper orgasms that are possible, and working through whatever layers of numbness or disconnect have been in the way, whether that's physical or emotional. So it's a more holistic approach, and I work with clients one-to-one online, normally for 6 months minimum, because it's really important to do this over a long period of time, so that they get that hand holding, and most importantly, so that people can go at their own pace. And then I'm training facilitators to do this work. So we've currently kicked off this year's program. Got some just amazing people in the group, including someone who's in their 70s. Like, everybody's really mature. And I also have shorter group programs. So the next one I'm running is called Orgasmic Confidence. And that's a 3-month group program for anybody who has a vulva. We have people come from all over the world for this. It's all online, and it's following that same roadmap of getting into the body, embodiment practices, cultivating full body pleasure, and then moving into orgasms. And we also look at boundaries, self-love. So it's a really lovely course. And that's the next thing that I will be sharing with the world. So yeah.
Amazing. Yum, 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 yum. Cool.
Mm.
Well, I'll definitely make sure I pop the links to those in the show notes. And and I've got a Labia Lounge Facebook group now, so I always put links and little groups and discounts and things like that in the group from different guests that I have. So feel free to jump on that group. Just thank you so much for, this has been an epic episode. I'm so stoked that I got in touch and that we made this happen, and just your willingness to talk about all of these things, which I know, not everyone's really down for that. So I really appreciate you going there with me.
Oh, it's so much fun. I love talking about this stuff. It's great. Thank you.
Me too. Awesome. So I'm just going to do my little outro spiel. If you would like to support the potty, and, if you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, then you can also buy some dope merchandise from my website, or donate to my Buy Me a Coffee page, which I call Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe wanker like that. And you can do a once-off donation there, or an ongoing membership, and sponsor me for as little as 3 clams a month. And every bit helps, because it's not cheap to put a sweet podcast out into the world every week on your own dime. So really would appreciate that if you can, but also no sweat if you can't. I'll pop all the links to that in the show notes too. And I really encourage you to follow Mangala on Insta or Facebook. Check out the links that I post below. It's really, she just knows her stuff, seriously. And I really enjoy reading your content. It's always thought-provoking too, which, it sparked this whole episode, one of your posts. So thank you, Mangala.
Thank you. I'm way more active on Facebook than Insta at the moment. So come and hang out with me over there. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, my love. I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's it, darling hearts. Thank you for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. And in the meantime, if you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that, my dear, is a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism. And you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify, and destigmatize with this here podcast. Also, I'm always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, or guest suggestions. So feel free to get in touch via my website at freyagraph.com, or say hey over on Insta. My handle is Freya_graph_YMT, and I seriously hope you're following me on there, because damn, we have fun. Anyway, later labial legends. I'll see you next time.